I want to speak to you today about something so powerful, something that I believe can change the course of your life. God knows you need a new path. Sometimes we find ourselves stuck, wondering if there's something more, questioning why we're in the place we are. But I want to remind you today that God sees you. He knows exactly where you are, and He's already made a way. You may feel like you're at a crossroads, but let me tell you, God is about to lead you to a new path, a path of healing, restoration, and endless possibilities. Your steps are ordered, and the best is yet to come. Get ready, because God is about to open doors you've never imagined. Trusting in God's timing can be one of the most challenging aspects of our faith journey, especially when the path ahead seems unclear. It's natural to want things to happen quickly, to want answers now, or to have a clear direction laid out before us. We live in a world where instant gratification is often the norm, and waiting for things can feel like a test of our patience. Yet it is in those moments when the path ahead is uncertain that we must lean into the truth that God's timing is always perfect. When we find ourselves in periods of waiting, it can be easy to fall into doubt. We may start questioning why things aren't moving forward, why we're still in the same place, or why our prayers seem unanswered. But what we may not always see is that God is working behind the scenes in ways we cannot understand. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean God isn't at work. His timing is not our timing, and His ways are not our ways. He sees the full picture, while we see only a small part of the story. Think about how many times in the Bible people had to wait for God's perfect timing to unfold. Abraham and Sarah were promised a child, but they had to wait many years before that promise was fulfilled. Their faith was tested, and at times it seemed like the promise would never come to pass. But when God did fulfill that promise, it was at the right moment in His divine plan. Had they received the child earlier, they wouldn't have experienced the fullness of what God had for them. His timing was perfect, and it was worth the wait. Similarly, when we look at the life of David, he was anointed king as a young man, but he didn't step into that role until years later. During those years, he faced many challenges, including fleeing from King Saul and living in hiding. David could have easily become frustrated or lost faith in God's promise, but he trusted that God knew the right time for him to become king. When the time came, David was ready, not just in his heart, but in his character. His waiting season refined him and prepared him for what God had in store. There are many times in life when we find ourselves waiting for something, whether it's a job opportunity, a relationship, healing, or a breakthrough. The waiting can feel overwhelming. It can feel as though everyone else is moving forward while we remain stuck. But in those moments, we must remember that God has not forgotten us. His plan for us is greater than anything we could imagine, and He will not let us miss out on what He has planned. We may feel like we are running out of time, but God is never in a hurry. He is never late. His timing is perfect, and He will reveal the next step when we are ready. The challenge is trusting Him in those moments when we don't have all the answers. It can be difficult not to rush ahead, to make decisions based on our own understanding, or to try and force things to happen. But God calls us to trust Him fully. Proverbs 3:05-6 reminds us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight." This means trusting that even when the path ahead doesn't make sense to us, God is still in control. He knows what we need, and He knows the right time to bring it to us. It's also important to recognize that sometimes God's perfect timing involves delays. Delays are not denials. When we face delays, we often wonder if we've done something wrong or if we've somehow missed the mark. However, God's delays are simply a part of His divine strategy. He may be preparing us, teaching us, or positioning us for something bigger than we can currently comprehend. What may seem like a setback could actually be a setup for something greater that lies ahead. In those times, we must hold on to the truth that God is always working for our good, even when we can't see it. We're also called to be patient in the waiting. Patience doesn't mean sitting idly by, It means trusting God while continuing to move forward in faith. Just because we are waiting on God's timing doesn't mean we are inactive. We are still called to be obedient, to serve, and to do what God has placed in front of us in the present moment. God may use this time to refine our character, deepen our faith, and equip us for what's coming. The more we trust in God's timing, the more we learn to surrender our own agenda and embrace His plan, this process teaches us to grow in areas like perseverance, trust, and humility. It's in the waiting that God can shape us into the people He needs us to be for the next season of our life. Moreover, trusting God's timing means surrendering control. We often feel the need to control our circumstances, to manage the outcome, and to determine when things will happen. But God is asking us to release that control to Him. When we do, we are opening ourselves up to His perfect plan. It's not about us figuring everything out. It's about us letting go and trusting that He already has it figured out. When we trust in His timing, we are putting our faith in His wisdom, His understanding, and His love for us. It's easy to trust God when things are going according to our plan, when everything is unfolding the way we expect. But real faith is tested when the path is unclear, when the future feels uncertain, and when we are waiting on God to move. It's in these moments that we are called to dig deeper into our relationship with God, to lean on Him and to trust that He is good, even when we can't see the full picture. God's timing is not just about the outcome, it's about the journey. It's about trusting Him every step of the way, even when we don't know what the next step looks like. When we trust that God's timing is perfect, we can move forward with peace, knowing that He is in control. We don't have to rush ahead or live in fear of missing out. We can rest in the confidence that God will make a way at the right time. It may not happen when we want it to, but it will happen when we are ready, when we are positioned to receive the blessings He has for us. And when that time comes, it will be worth every moment of waiting. Change is often one of the most difficult things to embrace, especially when it comes unexpectedly or when we find ourselves in a season of uncertainty. We can become comfortable in the known even when we are dissatisfied or restless, because the fear of the unknown is daunting. But when we embrace change, we are not just adapting to a new situation, we are acknowledging that God is guiding us toward a better future, one that we might not yet fully understand. Embracing change is a way of trusting that God's plan for us is greater than anything we could have imagined on our own. God's guidance often comes through moments of change, even those that feel uncomfortable or unsettling. Life doesn't always go the way we expect it to, and we often find ourselves facing situations that force us to step out of our comfort zones. It is in those moments, when everything feels uncertain, that we must recognize that change is not an accident, but a part of God's divine plan. Sometimes God has to move us from one place to another, whether it's physically, emotionally, or spiritually, in order to lead us into something better. But in order to receive the blessing of that change, we must first learn to embrace it. When we look at the lives of many great figures in the Bible, we see that change was often the pathway to God's purpose for their lives. Consider the story of Abraham. God called Abraham to leave his home, his family, and everything he knew to journey to a land that God would show him. The change in Abraham's life wasn't just geographical, it was a complete transformation of his identity and purpose. Abraham had to embrace the unknown, trusting that God's plan for him was worth the uncertainty. Through that obedience, Abraham became the father of many nations, and God's promises were fulfilled in ways far beyond what he could have imagined. Had he resisted the change, he would not have stepped into the future that God had prepared for him. Embracing that change was a sign of God's guidance, leading him to a better future than he could have ever dreamed. Similarly, when the Israelites were led out of Egypt, they experienced a massive change in their lives. For years, they had been enslaved, living under oppression and hardship. When God called them to leave Egypt, they had to leave everything behind: familiar surroundings, security, and a way of life they had known for generations. The journey to the promised land was not easy, and they faced many trials along the way. But that change was necessary for them to receive the blessings God had promised them. God knew that they needed to be freed from the past in order to step into the future He had planned for them. Although the process was difficult and filled with challenges, embracing the change was ultimately a step toward the better future God had for them. Change, while uncomfortable, was a tool God used to guide them closer to His will for their lives. In our own lives, we often experience moments of transition, whether it's a change in career, a move to a new city, the end of a relationship, or a shift in our health or circumstances. In those times, it can be easy to feel overwhelmed, lost, or fearful of what the future holds. We may want to hold on to the past to resist the change, or to retreat to what is familiar because it feels safer. But in these moments, we have to trust that God is at work. Change is not something to fear, but something to embrace as a sign that God is moving us toward a future that is aligned with His perfect plan. God does not bring change into our lives to harm us, but to grow us. He knows that in order for us to reach the next level of purpose and destiny, we must be shaped and refined. Change often comes as a tool for personal growth. It may stretch us, challenge our faith, and push us beyond what we think we are capable of. But through it, God is making us more resilient, more compassionate, and more aligned with His heart. The process of change refines us, helping us to develop qualities like patience, humility, and trust in God's provision. We can't always see it in the moment, but the growth we experience through change is often a sign of God's love and care for us. He wants us to become the person He created us to be, and sometimes that requires stepping outside of our comfort zones and embracing the unknown. The fear of change often stems from a lack of control. We want to know what's coming next, to have a clear path laid out for us. But when we embrace change, we are acknowledging that we don't need to control everything. We are putting our trust in God, knowing that He is in control and that His plans for us are good. Psalm 139:16 reminds us that all of our days were ordained by God before we were born, meaning that He already knows the path He has for us. Even when we face changes that seem abrupt or confusing, we can trust that God's hand is guiding us. His perfect will is unfolding, and He is using each change to direct us closer to the destiny He has for us. When we resist change, we are essentially resisting God's plan. Just as the Israelites were called to leave Egypt and embrace a new way of life, we too are called to let go of the past and step into the new things God has for us. This doesn't mean we have to abandon our past entirely or forget where we came from, but it does mean we can't stay stuck in a place that God is calling us away from. The moment we start to let go of what is familiar, we open ourselves up to new possibilities, new opportunities, and new relationships that God has prepared for us. When we hold on to the past too tightly, we risk missing out on the future that God has in store. Embracing change also requires us to have faith in God's timing. Often change comes when we least expect it, or at a time when we feel least prepared for it. It can be easy to question why things are happening the way they are. But when we trust in God's perfect timing, we can find peace in knowing that He is not making mistakes. He is not rushing us or leading us astray. He is guiding us step by step. And each change is a part of His perfect plan for our lives. In times of transition, it is important to remember that God is always with us. He has promised to never leave us or forsake us. And that promise holds true no matter how much change we experience. Embracing change is not about facing the unknown alone, but about walking with God every step of the way. He will lead us, strengthen us, and equip us for whatever comes next. When we fully embrace the changes that come into our lives, we are acknowledging that God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating everything for our good. Change is not always easy, but it is always a sign that God is guiding us towards something better. Whether we are leaving behind a chapter of our lives or stepping into a new one, God's hand is leading us toward a future filled with hope, purpose, and promise. The key is to embrace the change, trust in His plan, and move forward in faith, knowing that God's guidance will always lead us to a better place. Fear is one of the most powerful forces that can hold us back from stepping into the fullness of what God has for us. It has the ability to paralyze us, cloud our judgment, and keep us from moving forward in life. But as believers, we are called to live by faith, not by fear. We are called to trust that God is guiding us even when we can't see the way ahead. In order to fully embrace the new opportunities God has prepared for us, we must first let go of fear and take bold steps of faith. The Bible tells us in 2 Timothy 1:7 that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Fear is not from God. It is a tool that the enemy uses to keep us stuck, to prevent us from walking in the purpose and promises God has for our lives. But when we embrace the power of faith, we can rise above our fears. Fear may try to convince us that we're not capable, that we're not ready, or that we're not worthy of what God has for us. But faith tells us something entirely different. It tells us that with God all things are possible, and that He is leading us to a future filled with hope and opportunity. Taking steps of faith often requires us to move in the face of uncertainty. Faith is not about having all the answers or knowing exactly what will happen next. It's about trusting that God is in control and that He is leading us toward the good plans He has for us. When we let go of fear and take those first steps of faith, we are choosing to trust God's timing, His provision, and His wisdom. We may not see the whole path ahead of us, but we can trust that God will light the way, one step at a time. In the Bible, we see numerous examples of individuals who are called to step out in faith, even when fears seem like the natural response. One of the most powerful examples is the story of Peter walking on water. In Matthew 14, when the disciples were out on the boat during a storm, they saw Jesus walking toward them on the water. At first, they were terrified, thinking it was a ghost. But Jesus immediately reassured them, saying, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Peter, filled with faith, asked Jesus to command him to come to him on the water. Jesus said, "Come." And Peter stepped out of the boat and walked on water toward Jesus. This story is not just about walking on water. It's about overcoming fear and taking bold steps of faith. When Peter stepped out of the boat, he didn't know exactly how it would turn out. He didn't know if he would sink or if he would make it to Jesus. But he trusted in Jesus' command and took that step. In the same way, we are called to take steps of faith even when we don't have all the answers. We might be afraid of failure, of rejection, or of the unknown. But when we focus on Jesus and trust in His call, we can move forward with confidence, knowing He will be there to catch us if we fall. When we let go of fear and embrace faith, we are also letting go of control. One of the reasons fear holds us back is because we want to be in control. We want to know what's going to happen next, and we want to be able to manage the outcome. But faith requires us to release control and trust that God is leading us even when we don't know exactly where we're going. Proverbs 3:5-6 tells us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." This verse reminds us that when we trust God with everything, our fears, our dreams, and our future, He will guide us in the right direction. We may not have all the answers, but we can trust that God does, and that He is leading us toward new opportunities that are better than anything we could plan for ourselves. It's also important to recognize that fear often holds us back from pursuing new opportunities because we are afraid of change. Change can feel unsettling, especially when it involves stepping out of our comfort zones. But new opportunities often require change, and change is often the very thing that God uses to grow us and move us closer to His will. The Israelites had to leave the familiarity of Egypt in order to enter the Promised Land. They had to let go of their fear and trust that God was leading them toward a better future, even though they couldn't see the whole picture. The change was difficult and the journey was long, but through it, they saw the fulfillment of God's promises. Similarly, in our lives, embracing new opportunities often involves change. It may mean changing careers, moving to a new city, or stepping into a new role or responsibility. But when we trust that God is guiding us, we can embrace these changes with confidence, knowing that He has a plan for our lives that is far better than anything we could have imagined. Change may be uncomfortable, but it is also a sign of growth and progress. When we let go of fear and take steps of faith, we are opening ourselves up to the new things that God wants to do in and through us. One of the biggest challenges to stepping out in faith is the fear of failure. We may worry that if we take a step toward a new opportunity, we'll fail or make a mistake. But failure is not the end of the road. It's simply a part of the journey. When we fail, we learn, we grow, we become stronger and more resilient. And God, in His grace, uses those moments of failure to teach us. In Romans 8:28, we are reminded that we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Even when things don't go as planned, God is still working behind the scenes for our good. Failure doesn't define us. It's just another opportunity for God to show His faithfulness and lead us to new opportunity. As we take steps of faith, it's important to remember that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. We are empowered by the Holy Spirit to move forward in confidence, knowing that we are not alone in the journey. God is with us every step of the way, guiding us, strengthening us, and providing for us. And when we let go of fear and embrace faith, we are positioning ourselves to experience the abundant life that God has promised us. Taking steps of faith means trusting that God is leading us to new opportunities, even when we can't see the outcome. It means letting go of the fear of the unknown and stepping out into the new, knowing that God is with us and will never leave us. When we trust God and follow His lead, we can be confident that He is guiding us toward a future filled with His purpose, His blessings, and His plans for our lives. So let go of fear, take those steps of faith, and trust that God is leading you to the new opportunities that await you.